Howdy, folks. Today we're looking at Sláine, the Horned God #1 from 1993 in Fleetway quality. Sláine was created 40 years ago in Prague 330 of 2000 AD by Pat Mills and Angela Kincaid. In the decade since, the characters appeared many times, drawn by a host of estimable artists, but written only by Mills. However, growing up in the United States as I did, the legend of one particular run on the character overshadowed every other incarnation, Sláine, the Horned God. This was Simon Bisley's breakthrough in 1989, fresh off his earliest work on the ABC Warriors just the year previous and leading right into his stateside debut on Lobo for DC. This American reprint shipped in 1993, but it wasn't the first time the material had seen print over here, portions having been reprinted in Heavy Metal magazine 2 years previous. There was demonstrably great excitement over these stories in the years after they initially saw print. These were important strips, with Bisley's work here casting a shadow over the succeeding decade. If you've never had the pleasure, Sláine is the story of the titular ancient Celtic warrior king, a profane, violent, and highly sexual strip, not for the faint of heart in any of its incarnations. Sláine is an impulsive, occasionally brutal man, wielding the mighty war axe Brainbiter while suffering the fearsome warp spasm, a state of mystical battle frenzy. The Horned God is the story of Slaine's quest for the power to unite the tribes of the Earth Goddess against the Lord Weird Sloch Feg. This quest entails climbing down into a magic cauldron and communing with the Earth Goddess. And if you think communing with the Earth Goddess is a euphemism, it most definitely is. Bisley earned his reputation not merely for drawing unspeakable acts of violence, but also surpassingly beautiful women. Painted comics were still at the time a considerable novelty on either side of the Atlantic, but that was changing very quickly. What strikes me the most about early Bisley in hindsight is how clearly he wore the influence of Frank Frazetta, also a cartoonist and not coincidentally one of the greatest painters of motion who has ever lived. Howdy, folks. Today we're looking at Sláine, the Horned God #2 from 1993 in Fleetway quality. Slaine's quest to unite the tribes against the menace of the Lord Weird Sloch Feg gets underway upon the king's return from his communion with the Earth Goddess. Slaine's ambition is compromised, however, by the machinations of Migrim, the widow of Slaine's brother, and unbeknownst to Sláine, the consort of his great nemesis, the death wizard Sloch Feg. We meet him in these pages, a pitiful wretch 20,000 years old enough to remember and resent the ancient matriarchy that preceded the Celts, and which is still celebrated by that same goddess of Slaine's recent acquaintance. There are two horned gods here. There's Carnoon, the god of laughter and dancing and fertility, whose aegis is sought by Sláine, but the Lord Weird is also horned, a dry bag of bones, topped by great elk antlers, and who persists in a shambling parody of life. Sloch Feg is, after all, lord of death and decay, rot and oblivion, implacable enemy to Slaine's patron goddess, whose eternal youth and lasciviousness is an affront to any conscientious death cultist. Throughout, the story comes alive with Bisley's paint. What makes his work so special is the way in which he communicates caricature and humor with color. We all know painted comics can be stiff in the hands of lesser artists. Bisley breaks that mold with powerful imagery on every page. His drawings look like cartoons, move like cartoons, never losing an ounce of the spontaneity that serves as a calling card. The key here is that Bisley's no slave to realistic representation. Every aspect of his work is laced with exaggeration, from ghoulish and cretinous monsters through to the impossibly curvaceous women who surround Sláine. The world that we see here makes no attempt to ground the fantastic through counterfeit mimesis. Rather, he seems to embrace the influence of an artist like Ralph Steadman, who filtered material reality through the fantastic in such a way as to shake the moorings of both. It's not hard to see why this work took the industry by storm. It's still dynamite, revelatory work after all these years, truly in a class by itself. Howdy, folks. Today we're looking at Sláine, the Horned God #2 from 1993 in Fleetway quality. Anyone new to Sláine coming in cold might otherwise be surprised by the strip's talky nature. There's a lot of exposition, lore in the form of Celtic myth and politics, not to mention humor and even a bit of natural history. All well and good, I hear you say, bristling slightly in your chair, but this is Bisley drawing ancient Celtic barbarian kings, and so far in the story we've seen Sláine do much more in the way of talking than fighting, to say nothing of loving. As the great sages have said, where's the beef? Well, the beef is here. Sláine gets onto a dragon to fly to the far north in order to borrow the Spear of the Sun, one of the last of the ancient weapons he needs to unite the tribes against the Lord Weird Sloch Feg. Well, wouldn't you know, the witch Migrim, who already tried to kill Sláine last issue with a ghoul, is still at it. Here she summons a ghost dragon from another dimension. So, in case you were worried we wouldn't get to see Sláine fighting a dragon, rejoice, for there is indeed a dragon fight in these pages. There's also a bit of attention paid to spear technology this issue. to, with an aside about the mythical spear Gay Bulga, given by the warrior woman Scathach to the great hero Cuchulainn in the Ulster cycle, and underlined here as a woman's invention, a spear cast with 30 barbs, such as it goes in the body with great ease, but will eviscerate upon removal. Fun stuff. The real main event is the actual spear of Lug itself, shown as constantly on fire and described as incessantly screaming and bleeding, such that even in storage we are told it has to be strapped down to a drain pipe. It can find its target in any battle and return to its wielder's hand with the simple magic words Ibar and Athabar. Do we get to see Sláine slaughter the ghost dragon with the spear of Lug? You bet your ass we do. Next issue, we're promised a great fight between Sláine and one of the last living Neanderthals, the bestial Avank. That should be fun. Howdy, folks. Today we're looking at Sláine, the Horn God number 4 from 1993 in Fleetway quality. Sláine's quest to unite the kingdoms in advance of the war with the forces of the Lord Weird Slough-Feg reaches its climax with the final artifact, the Stone of Destiny, burgled from the Avank. Surprisingly, the massive battle with the last of the Neanderthals does not materialize. Rather, despite his ostensible savagery, the Avank is a figure of sympathy. The narration details his loneliness, separated by the veil of death from his wife and his family and his people. These factors render him easily manipulated by the sorceress Migrim, who jumps on the opportunity to take advantage of Sláine's uncharacteristic indecision after the stone is stolen back by the Avank. But, would you believe, Sláine is more wily than his foes expect. His dithering and his invitation to be distracted is merely cover for a burglary by his closest allies. And so it comes to pass that at the summit of the Bolg Danu, a real mountain in Ireland incidentally, the 4 great artifacts are united in the service of Sláine, chosen and consecrated by the ancient earth goddess, who appears before the assembled kings and nobles of Ireland to crown Sláine with a helmet of great horns. Will it be enough to stand against the hordes of the Lord Weird, death worshippers, and monsters from beyond the sea? With only 2 issues to go, the stage is set for a truly epic battle, the forces of life and death at war for the future of the Isles. Through it all, Bisley'S virtuosity never wavers, although of course the muscle-bound fiends and emaciated ghouls of myth stand out in his work. His mastery of tone and texture only heighten the unreality of the setting. The Avank's underwater cave is a dark, primeval womb. The masked forces of the Lord Weird supernal faded pastels, as if to emphasize the unreality in which the death cultists swim. Under Bisley'S hand, the blank page is transformed into a land and time of primal myth. Howdy, folks. Today we're looking at Sláine, the Horn God number 5 from 1993 in Fleetway quality. And so finally we arrive at the crux of the matter after 4 issues of preamble, exposition, and digression, the main event, the war between Sláine and the Lord Weird Slough-Feg. Both men are avatars of the great Horn God, both leading great armies into battle, but as unlike in worship as conceivable. Sláine represents the principle of life, represented by the goddess of fertility and lust, the feminine principles of fecundity and mystery. Sláine fights for nothing less than the restoration of the ancient prerogative of the goddesses, which also represents a political fight within his own coalition, to not doubt. If you've ever taken any anthropology, you'll remember that the time of the ancient priestesses, supposed era of the matriarchs in some distant mythologized past, is rarely if ever supported by the archaeological record, but that belief remains strong to this day, and it's on behalf of that belief that Sláine fights. And since we're on the subject, these fights are truly something else to behold. If you've maybe grown impatient on seeing Bisley draw exposition and travelogue, even through the mystic lands of ancient Britain, this is where things get truly brutal. Bisley's facility with violence needs no introduction. It's no coincidence that his signature achievement in American comics is his work on DC's Lobo, another character symbolizing pure violent id with a side order of sexual debauchery. For those waiting to see Sláine finally, after all this time, cut loose, this is where it's at. Sláine rides out to battle on his great war chariot, covered in sharpened pikes and knives and barreling into the enemy ranks at the speed of a galloping horse. One may, of course, question the wisdom of organizing a massive battle over a frozen lake, a danger for both sides, certainly. When Sláine falls beneath the cracking ice, there is only a momentary pause in the battle, as within a heartbeat the king rises from the deep, possessed in the heat of battle by the glorious and unpredictable warp spasm which deforms and distorts his flesh to monstrous proportions. In the vulgar vernacular, we see Sláine hulk out with a battle axe, and the results are as terrifying as you'd hope. Ultimately, the battle comes down to a principle of life versus death, 2 sides of the Horn God at war with one another. Although putrefied and rotting, the Lord Weird nevertheless represents a notable conservative principle of the primacy of death and the power of resentment of the living. a pungent and repulsive ideology that worships humongous maggots from beyond our dimension. Maggots and rotting meat are as much a part of the cycle of life as sex and harvest. Slaine's political appeal in restoring the ancient high kingship lies in the restoration of balance, a balance promised by a return to the ancient ways and a rejection of modernity in the form of ever metastasizing death cults. Howdy, folks. Today we're looking at Sláine the Horned God number 6 from 1993 in Fleetway quality. We reach finally the end of our saga, the battle to end all battles, the final duel between Sláine and the Lord Weird himself. Sláine at the first appears at a disadvantage, tied down and ready to be split from groin to gullet, but the Lord Weird underestimates Sláine at the last and is himself gored from boar's tusk hanging around the king's belt, and then by the Guy Bulger, yes, the very barbed spear described so menacingly in earlier issues. Of course, the Lord Weird doesn't actually die from the spear. No, this is Sláine the Horned God. Giant maggots from beyond our dimension come to Earth and eat him, and so he perishes. There is still, of course, much battle left as sinister Megrim marshals her worst sorceries against the armies of man. Ultimately, however, there is little she can do against the power of the warp spasm unleashed by the navel of Danu. This is primetime Bisley, what you've been waiting to see, flesh stretched and torn beyond the realm of humanity, transformed by mystic rites into something more horrible than man. Slaine's army falls as one into violent and human spasm, and so the battle is won. There is explicit discussion regarding the great push and pull of Slaine's adventures, the conflict between historiography and politics on the one hand, and the desire on the other to see great, endless, bloody battle. Pat Mills is a clever sort and appears to understand quite well the torsion inherent in such a character. For indeed, this is a story about the weight of myth and the transformation of history, of the creation of the Irish nation and the traditions of ancient kingship. And it's also a story where beefy barbarians swing massive battle axe and sultry witches glower from atop flying dragons. Simon Bisley made his mark here, and although Sláine has been illustrated by dozens of true worthies, some of the best artists 2000 AD has ever published, it is also true that Bisley's unmoored vision of the venerable king carries a definitive air. Gruesome and gorgeous in equal measure, Sláine the Horned God is one of the great achievements in painted comics, one of the most memorable fantasy stories ever told in the medium, and a not inconsiderable work of mythography. It remains, even at almost 35 years removed, a masterpiece.